Oh, that's right, race fans. Have we got an exciting matchup for you today? I've been hanging out for these. Let's have a look, shall we? What the hell? We tried to wait patiently for the race. We tried absolutely, but we couldn't wait any longer. We had to get in there. We had to race. What he said. Good evening, race fans, and we have a very special event lined up for you. Our first racer this evening and the defending champ hails from Velocitron. The challenger, hailing from Cybertron, has been known to tear up a race circuit or two back home. But you're not home anymore. Tonight, a winner will be crowned and a cyber planet key bestowed. This is the Velocitron Speedia500. Blurr versus Override. Welcome back, race fans. If this is your first time catching one of my Ham-Man 2-Up videos, the basic premise is pretty simple. I take two bots with a similar sort of theme, see how they stack up against each other in a bunch of categories, and at the end, there will be a winner. So let's go ahead and get into it, shall we? So starting off with Sculpt, and leading with the reigning champ, I gotta say, this is incredible. It is odd that the back of the head is see-through plastic when her eyes are painted. Maybe it was a last-minute running change or something. I bet Mark knows. What's so good about their sculpt is they've managed to not just faithfully update it based off the show model as well as the toy, is they've kind of managed to create a rendering of your fondest memories of the character Override. This just brings all of that Override energy. Mega Man boots and everything. She just has such sharp lines, which are then beautifully accented by all these gold apps. She's got all this paint, and like, oh, the racing stripes, the candy striping down there looks incredible. The gold inside of the wheels, even from the back. Like, yeah, it looks a little bit like she's gonna go bust some ghosts, but it's still a pretty tidy silhouette. By comparison, Blurr is kind of doing all the heavy lifting with that amazing looking head sculpt. That really was a very cool design from the comics, and it's good to see it carried over again. But pretty well, other than just, you know, that other 86 Blurr figure, they've redone the shoulders and they've redone these bits, which honestly I feel is largely to this figure's detriment. It's just such a kibbly kibble piece. For faux wheels, it's not a good trade-off. I will say though, compared to Override, his tolerances are pretty garbage. He also feels a little bit like, with these matte finishes, his plastic feels a little bit like he's actually made out of marzipan. And if you'd sculpted this out of marzipan, I'd be really, really impressed. But he just doesn't feel great. Alright, credit where credit's due, they both look quite cool. But given that he's a marzipan man, I think the point is definitely going to have to go to Penelope Pitstop. Override has that kind of beautiful toyetic quality of everywhere that it looks like she should move, she does, so it's a really intuitive kind of play pattern hand feel, like the shapes you wanted to throw, you can quite easily get her to throw them. Pretty well every shape that you throw her into is going to have like that cool anime sort of athletic skidding to a halt quality that you really want from a character like Override. Her head is on a ball joint with limited articulation, shoulders full 360, they can fold out to there, bicep swivel, 90 on the elbows, wrist swivel, waist articulation, but it is hindered by her weapon storage. Hips are on a universal, thigh swivel, great knees, well past 90. Her Mega Man boots have a little bit of a tilt to them. What I would have really liked to have seen out of this figure is some way to give her an ab crunch, and if there was a greater range of motion out of the ball joint on that head so you could really get into some real deep athletic poses. Also, side note, the mechanisms inside of her windshield look a bit like a scary lion face, and once you see that scary lion, you can't unsee it. It's almost got a little bit of a Supernaturals or Visionaries quality to it. Blurr's articulation feels a lot more modern, and it's got the full effects of, you know, that 86 style articulation. So his shoulders have a bit more range to them from transformation and things, so you can kind of cheat it. And it has that really cool thing of folding up and around that kind of exhaust port. He doesn't have wrist articulation unless you untab these massive bits, and he can't go quite as deep on those legs, but he can get to like a very solid 90. It just does have that seated sort of feel to it, and a deep tilt. So when it comes to their articulation, given that Override is a Voyager class figure, I think Blurr might just edge her out when it comes to articulation. But oh god, only just. That's a photo finish on that one. When it comes to their accessories, I'm actually going to make quite a controversial call, and I'm going to rule -1 point from each competitor. Ooh. Alright, before you judge too harshly, hear me out. So Override obviously comes with her big back-mounted gun, just like the original did, with its flip-out twin barrels. Now, the original had the excuse of being so big and doofy because it had a Cyber Planet Key action, and it was spring-loaded barrels. Given that this one isn't actually doing it, I feel like they could have still got the same idea across and had it sit much narrower, and I really don't think that this piece would have suffered for being a little bit smaller to compensate. I feel like this is an example of when they let trying to be faithful get in the way of kind of common sense. Blah blah blah. Blurr, on the other hand, comes with his Blurr pistol, which makes sense. It doesn't look great being in the same color as him, and then also in the same color as I guess his flesh tone? I don't know. You also get that little helping out on the shuttle thing, which I guess was a kind of cool nod when it was on the 86 one. Associated with this character, it's pretty meaningless. Who's displaying him like this? The reason for point deduction, however, is because it just seems like such a missed opportunity to me. If you're going to make Cosmos come with a gun that can also be a starter's flag, if this was a little bit smaller and less, unseemly, and if he hadn't come with this, and if they'd just gone that little bit of extra mile, wouldn't it have been awesome if the competitors came with pieces that helped make up like a first, second, and third sort of trophy cup? Imagine like two halves of an axe coming together to make the base of a trophy, and then Override having a Cyber Planet key that sits on top. That would have led into the narrative of the Speedia500 just so much more. And because of that missed opportunity, no points. No points for you. When it comes to comparisons, it's a bit of a one-stop shop for Override, seeing as this is only her second time ever fully realized in plastic. I know there's probably some people out here who haven't actually handled their Unicron trilogy figures in a while, saw this and were like, well, that's not really any different to the original. I don't know if that's that much of a glow-up. And then you see the original. Man, I used to love this toy. I thought this was like a really cool, articulated, good Transformer. But then when you see the original next to the update, there's really just no comparison here. When it comes to a comparison for this Blurr, the obvious choice is the 86 Blurr, his mold mate, and having a quick look at them together, you can see pretty well all they've changed is his crotch piece, his forearm kibble, the shoulders, and the head. Everything else is more or less the same. I think a better and more accurate comparison for IDW Blurr is IDW Blurr. Now, this figure is obviously an Earth mode imagining for this Blurr. Really cool use of that drift mold. Cool as this guy is, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find anyone who, given the choice of the two, is opting for the Speedia500 over, what was this? Just Generations? So when it comes to comparison, not only was Override probably more in need of an update than another Blurr, she also does it much, much smoother. You know what I mean? There was a modern Override shaped hole in my collection, like Wile E. Coyote busting through a wall, but that other Generations Blurr still works perfectly well if you find yourself desperately needing a multiversal IDW Blurr in your collection. That's why the comparison point goes to Override. I think for this section we'll do it the way Primus intended with these two, and we're just going to speed through it. Blurr's transformation is just as unexpectedly involved as it is with the 86 version. Again, with the added detriment of him kind of being a marzipan man. So nothing feels like it's tabbing together quite like it should. Override, by comparison, is a joy. There's so many engineering cues taken from the original toy. I guess because, there's such good transference between robot mode and alt mode, even with the kibbly bits on the back and stuff. It's also quite cool to see how modern engineering has altered some of the transformations slightly to help get a more compact vehicle mode and a sleeker robot mode. For her intuitive, sturdy, and nostalgic transformation, advantage Override. Right, this is what she looked like, more or less. She did have the dumb head there. Actually, a few Cybertron figures had the dumb head just sitting there. I will say, given that it's kind of like a sleeker, smaller car, the size of this really doesn't work for me. Again, it gives her kind of a station wagon feel, as opposed to alien sports car. And if we go ahead and get her in with the original, you can see they have done a really nice job of updating this. I think where the original still has a slightly cooler vehicle mode is that because the original's torso was so much bigger, the back end of the car feels more fully realized on the original than on this update. I think this whole weapon gimmick being such a big deal on her is again to a detriment because you can't even fold out the guns. It seems like a weird choice. Again, you find yourself forgiving the original because pow! It works in alt mode as well as robot mode. Love me a Cyberplanet key. But when this doesn't do that, you are a little bit like, well, why'd you do that? Then when you take a look at Blurr, the added kibble in robot mode of putting these wheels on, like, I got that they were already faux wheels, but I thought somehow there might have been some back wheels that came out somewhere. I mean, they don't even touch the ground. This is one of those partials where you appreciate the effort, but the execution still leaves a little something to be desired. So look, whilst I'm not particularly blown away by either vehicle mode, one of them is unquestionably doing a much better job at being a vehicle. But the winner of this round comes down to one simple test.
Let's go! Mamma mia!
I don't know. Pretty big factor in a speed-based alt mode. So obviously on this one, the point has to go to override. Well, this is it. The final category, vibe. This is all about hand feel and shelf appeal. It's also obviously the least objective category. Basically, which one's my favorite? So whilst Blurr definitely poses out really cool and strikes a really stunning silhouette and has that awesome head sculpt, I do find a little bit him being all those really soft pastel-y blues. He almost like force ghosts himself away into the background. But Override, I've not been able to put down. This has honestly been one of the standout figures of the season, and I think she's still definitely the MVP and all-time lap champion for the Speedia500. There have been two worthy competitors tonight, but there can only be one winner. And with that, I think we're safe to crown our Speedia500 champion, Override. In a range that was pretty well all repaints, remolds, to get such an intentioned mold where I can't see them getting a lot of, reuse out of it, it's just really cool that they decided to go ham. How do we feel about tonight's matchup, people? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to click the clacks and do all the things that you need to do to make this beast grow.